Hello YouTube, welcome back to the channel. So inspiration comes in very strange places. I actually didn't have any video planned for today, but I came across something yesterday that was kind of inadvertent. But then later on in the evening, I saw something else and it kind of led me down the path of thinking of a little video idea. So I want to give credit where it's due. So I'm going to share a little bit of a screen grab and then I'm doing it this way with the StreamYard just because it makes it easier for me to flip between these different tabs. But last evening, I was watching the live stream with Bowman53 on their channel. So this is the Card Room Live Session 18. I'll include a link to that in the description. And basically, Alex was out there late evening. I'm a night owl, so usually I catch stuff like that. But late evening, and he basically had some folks come on. And of course, you got Baseball Collector Mike and the infamous Bob Lewis, who's been on the channel a number of times. And Bob's a lot of fun to kind of sit around and shoot the breeze with. So, not surprisingly, Bob was able to come on and have a little bit of a chat. But in the course of doing that, when I saw that Bob was on there, I kind of had a little bit of fun where at a certain point they were talking about Bob's propensity for prolific YouTube content creation. And of course, being a helpful individual, I came up with a beautiful analogy that kind of played into it. And I don't think the other two quite got it, but Bob picked up on it, messaged me back, and we had a little laugh about it. Basically, given like I said, the prolific nature of Bob Lewis's production in YouTube videos, which is to say once in a century or so approximately, I basically said with the anticipation building and with the amount of time we're going to have to absorb and consider and think about what the next Bob Lewis video could be, it's going to be the YouTube version of Chinese democracy. Bob got that reference pretty well pretty quickly, and like I said, the other two I don't think quite caught on to it, but I'll explain a little bit more in case that reference doesn't mean anything to you. But like I said, Bob picked up on it, so I was able to kind of go with it. But so that was the first part of it. I saw the live stream. I threw out a little joke in the chat, which oftentimes I do and stuff like that. But then I was looking at something else, and that led me back down to thinking about this. And actually, it came full circle because I mentioned, like I said, the Chinese democracy. And I'll quickly give you a quick background, and then I'll show you the other thing that led me to thinking about it again. So I actually have a copy of the infamous album in question. So it's Chinese Democracy by Guns N' Roses. Now this album has very kind of an interesting piece of music history in it. Spoilers to those of you who haven't heard it before. It's not an amazing album. It's not a terrible album. It's decent. It's pretty good. I guess it depends on how much you enjoy Axl Rose's lyrics and songwriting, and also his his voice and singing. And if you prefer some of the older Guns N' Roses album, it might not be satisfying to you. But I think the biggest thing with this one, and this is the only Guns N' Roses album I actually have in CD, or LP or whatever the case may be, and that's just because it was kind of infamous in what happened with it. And I'll give you kind of the short version of it. Basically, coming off the successes of the late 80s and the early 90s, you have Guns N' Roses coming off Use Your Illusion 1 and 2. They sold 35 million albums, and I got a couple of notes here to the side, so I'll be looking over a little bit as I go, just to give you some details accurately. But they're coming off this amazing success in the early 90s. So 91, they've got these two amazing albums coming in. In 93, they come up with an album that's kind of just, it's not well received. It's not amazing. It's the Spaghetti Incident, question mark. But between that, 1993, so coming off this huge success, Appetite for Destruction, Use Your Illusion 1 and 2, they're doing all this great stuff, they're huge. Then they run into kind of internal problems. Axl Rose is kind of erratic, he's all over the place. Basically, they run through lineup changes and all that, but it looks like at some point they're going to create a new album, which eventually ends up being this, and I'll get back to this in a second. But the point is, they go through all these lineup changes and all that, and then the recording process begins. And again, this album became infamous. Not so much because of the quality of the album, because like I said, it's a decent album. Is it an amazing album? No. Would I discourage you from checking it out if you're curious? No. Definitely, it's worth checking out if you are interested. You can get it on Spotify or a lot of streaming services now, and you can listen to a couple of the tracks, and if you like it, great. If you don't, then you're not out more than a little bit of time. But the point is that they go through this whole process and they're starting to record this album, and it's kind of stop and starts and re-recordings and going from studio to studio. And at one point, the label finally gives up on it. And the end result is you have this album that was originally expected to be released in 1999 that basically continuously goes through this entire process, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And it doesn't even have a name for a long time, and then eventually it has a name, and it becomes kind of this infamous thing in music where 1999 Pat comes and goes, and there's all these little stops along the way where it looks like, okay, so is anything going to happen? And it becomes a bit of a running gag. But eventually you reach a point where Geffen, who had been funding a lot of these studio sessions and things up until that point, We'll never know the full amount, but the thought process was that the New York Times basically said that the production costs had reached $13 million, and they still haven't released a stupid album. So it's one of those things where it's becoming this infamous kind of sinkhole of money, and it just money keeps getting thrown in and in and in, and all this time is going by. Now the end result is in 2008. The album is finally released. So at that time, I remember that I was working at a liquidation store, kind of working in retail, and I heard about this, and I had heard a little bit about the infamy of the album, and I was one of those folks that actually bought the damn thing right around release time. So this is 2008. 1999 was supposed to be the original release date, so you got 9 years between all these different things. That's why I made the joke with the Bob Lewis production thing. It's like, so we've still got like another 7.5, 8 years before the next Bob Lewis video. Now, if that had been it, then I wouldn't be making this video right now. So I just wanted to give you a little background so you understood what this was. Okay, so how did this come into play in terms of why I'm even making this video? And where does Jasson Dominguez come into this? Because Jasson Dominguez's name is going to be in the title. So what the hell does this have to do with Jasson Dominguez? Specifically, I was checking out, I had been seeing, kind of these little postings. I have the card ladder thing, so I'll get the little emails about, record sales and stuff. And I don't really make videos on record sales anymore because we've kind of become desensitized to it. But this one did catch my eye, and I thought it was kind of interesting, so I'll share it with you and then explain to you how this all comes around to Chinese democracy, where that even comes into play here. So specifically in this Goldin auction, and I'm going to pull up the tab here for you, I'm looking at the 2020 Bowman Chrome Prospects Autographs Superfractor, 1 of 1. Jasson Dominguez signed Bowman rookie card. Okay, so pretty fancy, pretty fancy schmancy card here with the Superfractor and all that. Okay, it's a PSA, it's a Gem Mint 10, all that good stuff. Fine, whatever. It's a 1 of 1, so whatever. So it ended up selling on Goldin for $474,000 with the buyer's premium. So $395,000 winning bid, and then with the buyer's premium tacked on, $474,000. Now, by any account, by anybody's metric, this is an astronomical price, like a ridiculous, ludicrous price. But that in and of itself doesn't really warrant much more discussion. It's a ludicrous price. It's a lot of money to take on a hell of a gamble. But it did lead me, like I said, the timing on this turned out pretty well because it kind of brought me back to that album that I was talking about. And I actually listened back on some of the tracks a little bit earlier today, kind of reacquaint myself with it. I've heard it a couple of different times over the years, and of course I originally listened to it when I bought it. And my assessment of the album today is the same as it was back in 2008. It's a decent album. It's pretty good. Is it amazing? Does it warrant a bunch of replays and stuff like that? No, not really. Like I said earlier, and I'm not a music critic by any stretch of the imagination, but it's an album. And for me, the entertainment value was in having it and the kind of the backstory and the infamy of it. But the reason why I say that it's pretty good, it's decent, however you want to measure it, like I'm saying it's not bad, and I'm saying it's not amazing. I'm saying it's somewhere in that middle ground. The point is, though, that it creates this interesting little scenario where you have this album that had all this, going on around it, years in development. It got stuck in development hell for years and years and years. And there was kind of an anticipation, but also at the same time, a thought process, maybe it's never going to come out. And then when it did, it was kind of this shock, I remember at the time, like I said, with all the infamy built into it. And then the reaction was, kind of what I gave. It wasn't like this, like, oh my God, this is the greatest album ever made. And it wasn't like, oh my God, this is terrible. And in a certain way, that kind of prevented it from becoming a lot more infamous, even in the long run, than it ended up being. It's still kind of an interesting musical footnote as far as kind of the history, the development, and everything led up into it. But at the same time, you kind of needed one of the two extremes, I think. You either needed the album never to come out or be a complete disaster. So that's one end of the spectrum. Or on the other end of the spectrum, if it had been like the greatest Guns N' Roses album of all time in terms of quality and the way that people received it. And after all those years, because by that point it would have been 15 years since their previous studio album. So 1993 to 2008. So you can imagine if somehow it had been this amazing comeback and Axl Rose is suddenly on top of the world, wins a Grammy or something, like whatever. The point is that if it had been this crazy, amazing thing, that's one thing. Or if it had been this crazy disaster, another thing. Or if it never got released at all. Since 1999, all these years later, 23 years later, we're still talking about this album that never gets released. That would have added to the infamy and taken it up another level. But the fact it was an album and the fact it was a decent album, actually kind of downplayed it because in a certain way you could never have met expectations because with all that buildup. And at the same time, it didn't leave itself enough to be distinct. Now, all this said, what the hell does this have to do with Jasson Dominguez? My question is Is, having a sale, a record sale of this kind of price point for a prospect who has not even had one major league appearance or at bat yet at this point in time, is this setting itself up for kind of it's a Chinese democracy, so to speak, of trading cards? And the reason I say that is because you're already starting off at this ridiculous price point. So this card already is going to have, people's eyes on the radar for the next several years as we find out Jasson Dominguez is, fate. But it is going to be kind of interesting to see that when you've got the price point this high, you've already baked in a lot into the value of this card, even as a gamble. It's like prospecting is always a gamble because it is a prospect autograph, as it shows there. Prospecting is always a gamble. And this isn't take an established, brand or an established player versus the prospecting, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about that. You got to know that prospecting is a gamble. That shouldn't be news to anybody. The point is, though, that prospecting has historically been part of the game here, so to speak. But when you're talking about this price point, prospecting is like buying a lottery ticket. So you imagine like your Powerball or your Super Lottery or whatever you want to call it. People like the idea of buying a ticket and maybe getting a chance at getting the jackpot. It could be a huge score for you. But imagine if instead of a lottery ticket being $2, $3, $5, or whatever it is in your jurisdiction, imagine if you had to pay $5,000 for a lottery ticket, but imagine if your odds were no better, or $10,000 for a lottery ticket and your odds did improve 1 percentage point. That's basically what we're talking about here. Prospecting has always been high risk, but at a lower price point, well, if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out. If it doesn't work out here, you're already $474,000 in the hole. And the reason why I say it kind of relates to this Chinese democracy thing is, in a certain way, the only two ways that this can really work out, and I'll lay out a few scenarios for you. Scenario one, Jasson Dominguez never makes a single major league game, or he gets into a major league game and, has struggles, because right now in A-ball and rookie ball, he only hit, I think it was, I've got it here in front of me. He only, at this point, again, very small sample size, less than 60 games, but he's only hit 252 in rookie and A-ball, which isn't anything to write home about, especially with all the hype and especially with, like I said, $474,000 reasons why hopefully he becomes a great player. But at this stage in the game, he has almost nothing. He's literally only days ago turned 19 years old. It's going to take some time for this to play out. But scenario one, it's an absolute historic disaster. He is the draft bust of draft busts. And this card becomes infamous for the buyer losing their mind and paying this much money. And, 38 bids says other people were willing to take a gamble as well. This becomes like the greatest cautionary tale in, sports card history. In a certain way, that would probably, again, it wouldn't be worth $474,000 after that, but to a collector who appreciates hobby history, it would still have some value if it was truly disastrous in terms of the way his career pans out, if he never makes it onto a major league roster in a real game, or if his career is short and kind of fizzles out. The second scenario is if he becomes a pantheon all-time great player, for the Yankees, multi-World Series championships, home run crowns, triple crown, whatever. Pick your best case scenario. Even if this occurs, then maybe it'll be a bargain price. This could be a great hobby story from that perspective. Is that possible? Sure. Is that probable? No. The chances, I wouldn't put my chances on that. You're already, like I said, you've already got a lot baked into this price point. The more likely scenario is somewhere in between, which creates a bit of a weird scenario. And I'm going to show you another card in a minute that was also part of this Goldin Auction that is going to be an interesting comparable because it's similar price point wise, but could not be any more different in how we arrived at it. So I want to show you the stats for a different player. I gave you two simple examples: the total disaster, huge draft bust, and then the pantheon level player. Two extremes, two opposite ends, which could at least make it interesting going forward. But what about if we go in between? What if we, instead of doing that, what if we end up with a player who has a good, solid major league career, a decent length career, has some accolades, maybe wins a championship. And then we think about what would happen to the price point of that card if this was the career that played out. And the comparable that I'm going to use for you, I'm not comparing the players themselves because I'm not a scout, so I haven't seen enough of the player to play. But let me use this example here. What if Jasson Dominguez pulls out a career like an Alex Gordon? Now, This is not meant to be insulting to Alex Gordon. Alex Gordon had a decent major league career and a good length major league career. Played for one team, and you can see the accolades in the corner here, the baseball reference page. He's a three-time All-Star. He's won 8 Gold Gloves. He was part of the 2015 World Series champion Kansas City Royals team, and 2 times Platinum Glove as well. So again, some accolades. A career 257 average, 190 home runs. Nothing super crazy, but at the same time, a good serviceable major league career. He ended up playing 14 seasons. That's nothing to sneeze at. That's not bad. That's not, and towards the end of his career, he finished with 4 straight years of Gold Glove play. That's not half bad at all. But if this was the career that played out for Jasson Dominguez, a 14-year career, wins a World Series, wins multiple Gold Gloves, he's pretty decent, leads the league in doubles one year, hits 300 a couple of times. Do you think that card would remain $474,000? In some ways, this would be the worst case scenario. This would all of a sudden be the Chinese democracy thing playing out. You've got all this, the story is better than the result. Because with all this buildup and everything, it needed to be an absolute disaster, or it needed to be the greatest thing of all time in order to justify the story reaching a satisfying conclusion. There's nothing wrong with the results that we got out of it, but it was impossible for this to ever have been able to live up to the billing ahead of time. This was an extra 9 years in development from when they originally thought they were going to release it. If this had been the worst album of all time, that would have at least made it infamous. If this had been, the greatest Guns N' Roses albums of all time and relaunched Axl Rose into the mainstream, this would have been an infamous album as well, to a certain degree. The fact that it was a good album actually was almost the worst case scenario, with the great build-up and great story that kind of led into it and all those years in between. And that's kind of where Jasson Dominguez is right now. That's kind of my point with this whole thing. The point of this video is just outlining that they've kind of put themselves behind the 8 ball. And by that, I mean the bidder is that they're taking a weird gamble, a really high price point entering into it, and baking in these accomplishments that I don't know if it's going to be able to hold up. So I want to use one more comparable. And I'll compare kind of the careers of the two people. And it's not fair. It's not remotely fair. But the only reason I'm bringing it up is that the price point is very, very similar. So that's kind of what makes it interesting. So I'm going to share this one with you, again, from Goldin. This is all from the same Goldin Auction, this most recent one that just closed recently. So now I'm going to pull up the tab here for this one. And here is the 2001 Bowman Chrome Refractor autograph for Albert Pujols. So this is an autograph, I think rookie card parallel, if you will. And it is hard signed on there. And it is a PSA 10 with a 10 autograph. And that one sold for $462,000 with the buyer's premium, $10,000 less with the winning bid, and another, it ended up being $462,000 as opposed to the $474,000 for the Jasson Dominguez. So both PSA, both 10s, both autographed on card autographs. Now, this Bowman Chrome, refractor, signed card. This one here is a card that is numbered to 500. So there are 500 copies of this, including raw and other third-party graders and such. So it's not apples to apples because this is not a superfractor. But the two players are not apples to apples because Albert Pujols is right at the end of his career. He will either retire this upcoming season, depending on when and if it starts, or maybe he'll find a team, latch on, and do one more year. But the two players could not be any more different. And one more point I want to make about this card is even though there's 500 cards, it does have a fairly low pop count as far as, being in PSA 10. Because a lot of times, these cards have different types of damage they can have. But in addition to that, you also have to bear in mind that a lot of them don't have the clean autographs this one does. This one actually has a pretty clean autograph. Pretty solid, especially for it. You can tell it's a more premium card for this type of, in terms of grading, and then also in terms of the quality of the autograph. This would be like certainly a grail card for a baseball fan or a baseball card collector. This is an amazing card of a future first ballot Hall of Famer. Albert Pujols' credentials are not in doubt. But what made it funny to me is, like I said, the price point is very close to that Jasson Dominguez. Now, I don't need to tell you which card I would rather have. I don't have $500,000 either way. It doesn't really make a difference. But the differences. And then I want to kind of go back to the idea a moment ago of expectation based on price point. Albert Pujols' card has built up to this point over 20 years of a playing career in which he has plenty of accomplishments. And I'm going to share those accomplishments with you here in a second because I want to compare kind of what we just talked about. So we've got a player who has less than 60 games at a professional level at A-ball and rookie ball selling for $474,000. And then we have a player with an over 20-year career, 3-time MVP, 10-time All-Star, 2 Gold Gloves, a batting title, 3 times Major League Player of the Year, Rookie of the Year, 2-time World Series winner, 6-time Silver Slugger, and the NLCS MVP. So the difference between Albert Pujols and Jasson Dominguez right now, in addition to over 20 years of age, is approximately 3,300 hits, 2,150 RBIs, and 679 home runs. Because Jasson Dominguez does not have one. Not one single at bat, not one single plate appearance, not one single home run, not a walk, nothing. But price point wise, they ended up very close to that at Goldin Auction. So my point, like I said, bring it all around. The reason why I use that musical analogy, that musical comp, is because now that card is going to enter into the kind of the lore of the hobby. It's going to be an infamous card. And we'll spend the next several years kind of observing what's going to happen. I don't know what's going to happen to Jasson Dominguez. I have no idea. My crystal ball doesn't work, unfortunately. What I do know, though, is my question would be this. You paid $474,000 for that Jasson Dominguez card. If Jasson Dominguez was to match the career of Albert Pujols that I just gave you, 3-time MVP, 10-time All-Star, I'm not going to read everything through again, 2-time World Series winner, all that. A guy who was perennially, for the first half of his career, a threat to win a Triple Crown. Consistently year in and year out. One of the greatest hitters of his generation, first ballot Hall of Famer, no doubt. Would the card retain its value? I know it's a 101 Superfractor, so I guess in theory it could go up from there, but would an Albert Pujols career be good enough? That's why I said, back to this analogy here. If this had been even a 10% better album, a 20% better album, would that have been enough to warrant that huge layoff, the long period of time between it, and the time that had all that hype to build up? No, probably not. Again, it would have had to be the extreme. It would have to be like a truly terrible result that made it infamous. Still would have lost value. Or it would have to be like a pantheon level. And to me, like hitting-wise, Albert Pujols is close to being a pantheon level, especially in his prime. And overall, he's second all-time in RBIs. He almost 700 career home runs, like amongst the best of all time that has ever been. 3,300 hits to go along with all that power. So to me, there's no doubt that he is amongst the greatest to ever do it. But what we're talking about here is, do you have to be like a Ruth? Do you have to be like a Hank Aaron? Do you have to be like one of the tippy top of all the different offensive categories? And maybe win some World Series for the Yankees. You got to have the brand to go along with all that as well, to even come close to justifying the current price. So it's not even going up. Can you even sustain if you were to put it back on the market in 5 or 10 years? And that's assuming they have a career like what I'm talking about. Let alone if he has a career, like I said, like an Alex Gordon, who has a decent career, who stakes with one team, who wins a World Series, who is a multi-time All-Star. Pretty good player. But that card isn't staying. It's $474,000 at that level. It's not going to hold up. At that point, then you're kind of stuck with that middle ground that, unfortunately, basically one extreme might give you something, one extreme might give you something else, and the middle ground with a lot of room in between, that's the part where you kind of get stuck in the middle. And unfortunately for the person who paid for that Superfractor, the only place you can't really be comfortable sitting in is in the middle. You're hoping for the absolute best, and you're buying a very expensive lottery ticket. Just kind of a fun little video where I got to bring in a little musical reference, but then at the same time also it turned out kind of an interesting timing in terms of that comparable with the Goldin Auction closing the way it did. I'm not going to do too many more videos related to a lot of these auction results unless there's something interesting that comes up like that. Like I said, if I had $500,000 to burn, I definitely would rather have the Pujols card for the reasons I've outlined, but it was kind of interesting to be able to compare the two since they were so close in terms of price point in the same auction. Anyway, I welcome your thoughts, kind of not just which one you would prefer, like, that's too easy. But the question I have is, with that much pricing baked in, could you actually see a scenario where the Jasson Dominguez card could ever hope to forget about grow, let's say sustain? What kind of a career do you think that he would need, actually, in order to even sustain its value in 5 or 10 years, let alone try to grow it? Would it require those multiple world championships? Would he have to be a 3, 4, 5-time MVP? Like, how good does it have to be in order to even hold the line at where he is right now? That would be the question that I would ask you. Other than that, more videos coming up on the channel. Live streams Friday evenings. We'll be doing another one tomorrow. So I'm recording this on a Thursday. It'll be Friday, 9 p.m. Eastern time. We'll talk about more hobby happenings. I do have a couple of things that I'll bring up hobby-wise that we'll have some fun with. And otherwise, whatever else the chat wants to talk about. Anyway, so that's it for me this time around. Thanks as always for watching. We'll catch you in the next one.